Good evening. My name is Michelle McGrath, and we're live here from Moore Park, where we're having our first webinar as part of our virtual CAF week in conjunction with Teagasc and AHI. I would like to welcome you all tonight and thank you for registering. We have a very interesting panel lined up to discuss housing and preparing for the CAF period. So join me now to meet the panel in studio. So you're welcome to the studio. Let's get started by getting the panel to introduce themselves. So we have Joe Patton here from Teagasc. Welcome, Joe. Thanks for joining us. Would you like to give us a brief description of yourself, please?
Hi, Michelle. Yeah, sure. I'm a ruminant nutritionist working with Teagasc, so I'm working across dairy and beef systems, looking at mineral, vitamin, and energy and protein nutrition for the stock.
Great, thanks, Joe. And Martina Harrington from Teagasc also.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, I'm Martina Harrington. I'm a cattle specialist working with Teagasc. I mainly cover the counties in the southeast, working with advisors and farmers.
Great, thanks, Martina. And finally, Charles Chavaz from Zoetis.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, Charles Chavaz from Zoetis, area veterinary manager. I was a vet in general practice for 25 years, but I've been in the industry for the last 10, and my interests are calf health and calf rearing systems.
Great. So as you can see, we have a very varied panel, and we look forward to a very interactive webinar tonight. So just some housekeeping. There's the questions and answers section at the bottom of your computer or phone, whichever you're using. And this, we want to encourage you to write in any questions you have in relation to the topics we're discussing tonight. So the topics we are discussing tonight are preparing for the calf season and also calf housing. So we'll have a mixture of some videos and then some questions and answers. So we'll keep it very interactive, as I say, and we encourage you to get your questions in early. So we'll start off by with our first video. It's on preparing for the calving season, and it's 3 minutes long, and we'll be back to you after that with some questions.
Calving is a stressful time for both the farmer and the animal. To try and reduce this stress and ensure a successful calving period, we must be prepared. Trace element deficiencies, especially in copper, selenium and iodine, have been associated with higher incidence of stillbirth, retained placenta and weak calves. To avoid this, ensure your cows are getting a good pre-calving mineral for at least 6 weeks before they are due to calve. Talk to your vet about specific mineral deficiencies on your farm and what practical solutions you can put in place. The biggest payback of feeding pre-calving minerals is improving calf vigour and viability. Protein is important to ensure good quality colostrum. If you have first or second time calvers or poor protein silages, it can be a good idea to feed 200 to 300 grams of soya for 2 to 3 weeks before calving. You can test the immunoglobulin levels in your colostrum by using the Brix refractometer. A clean environment is essential to reduce infection and disease. Scrape and lime any slatted areas. Lime the calving pens and ensure they are well bedded with clean dry straw. Keep cows clean to reduce the risk of environmental mastitis and prevent the young calf from sucking on dirt. Clean and disinfect calving pens after each use and use a disinfectant that kills the pathogens on your farm. Check your calving equipment well ahead of calving time. Clean and service the calving camera and check the calving jack is working properly. If necessary, repair or replace. Always have a spare set of calving ropes. If you are using calving detectors, ensure they are working and have new batteries. Have a red lamp available for any weak calves, and calf jackets are also helpful for those weakened calves. Write a shopping list. This should include your ropes, lubricant, gloves, iodine, etc. Ensure to purchase well ahead of time and have your tags ordered. Store in a clean, dry area close to your calving pens. shopping list, log on to teagasc.ie. Always think safety. Ensure your pens and gates are working properly. Have good lighting in your shed. Always have an escape route planned. Carry your phone in an accessible pocket and know your own air code.
So as you saw in the video there, it mentions pre-calving minerals. And Joe, I just wonder, could you talk to us in a bit more detail about what minerals are actually important and some general advice around picking a pre-calving mineral, please?
Yeah, okay. So I suppose the thing to remember here, Michelle, is we have to be conscious of quantity and quality as well. I think sometimes we spend an awful lot of time talking about the spec of the mineral, and sometimes then maybe at farm level the error is in the amount fed. So it is important to measure out whatever it says on the bag, that's what should be fed. So generally 100 to 120 grams of a good quality pre-calver mineral for probably 6 weeks pre-calving is what we'd be talking about. So what's made up in that, really, we're talking about we have our macro minerals, or our big chunky minerals like magnesium and phosphorus as well. So particularly magnesium, maybe for improving improving milk fever. The success around that, so maybe 20% to 25% magnesium would be needed, maybe somewhere between 3 and 5% phosphorus in and around those levels. No added calcium, obviously. So those are the big chunky minerals, and look, they have to be fed every day. Like they're so big and so chunky that a bolus won't cover those, right? That's the important point. We have to make sure to feed them every day. A bolus won't do it. Now, the trace elements that were mentioned in the video, things like selenium, iodine, copper, cobalt, manganese, all those, they're needed in tiny quantities every day, so milligrams per day. So generally speaking, a good quality mineral should contain adequate levels of all of those. And I suppose speak to your advisor or to your vet maybe in terms of the specifics on those if you think you've had a problem in the past. So look at where there are issues of deficiency or maybe issues of antagonists previously, maybe feeding some protected trace minerals might be of benefit. And I suppose also on that, we can't forget the vitamins as well, particularly vitamin D, maybe for particularly on the dairy cow side of things for milk fever prevention. I know some herds over the last couple of years have had good responses to feeding additional vitamin D from a milk fever prevention point of view. So look at, people have this argument then about whether it should be bucket licks or whether it should be dusted minerals. I think really to ensure consistency, probably a dusted mineral on the silage for maybe 6 weeks pre-calving goes an awful long way.
Okay, great. Thanks, Joe. And so, Martina, from the beef point of view, I would have seen a lot of grass tetany in beef cows after calving. What advice would you give to farmers to prevent this?
Yeah, I suppose like just going on what Joe said there with the pre-calving minerals first. We would be also recommending the dusting on the silage, and it's the same thing that 100 grams. And I suppose on the beef side of things, because we wouldn't have that heavy milk after calving, we'd probably be looking at more about 18 or 20% magnesium in the mineral. And I suppose after calving, what we'd be looking at really is when you're going out with your cows and they're going on to grass, there really should be mineral buckets going out with them, and buckets, not just the one bucket in the corner. You should have a couple of buckets out with your cows that they're able to go and lick them. And I suppose like when we'd be looking at, a lot of lads would be saying, well, okay, maybe on the second rotation when grass is leafy or whatever else, but there's no point in taking that risk. If you put the buckets out there, they'll get used to going and licking them, and they'll get used to them, and that'll prevent you ever having a problem. And
it's good to know. And what kind of ratio of buckets to cows are you looking at? Or
we'd usually be looking at kind of maybe a bucket to every 15 cows or so.
And keep them high off the ground.
Keep them up off the ground to avoid TB and knocking them over and that kind of thing. Like, so if they're up, you'll avoid that.
Okay. I suppose body condition score is something people always worry about in the dry period, and I know it's probably a bit late for the cows near calving now, but is there any kind of tips around body condition scoring, Martina, you'd give now? Or
Yeah, I suppose like if we're looking at it on the suckler cow side of things, like we mightn't be calving as earlier, and we might be able to go in and do some interventions, but you'd be looking at a 2.5 is what the body condition score that we're looking there. So there's just a little bit of fat on the tail head and over the transverse process. Cows that are calving in the next couple of weeks, there's nothing really that you can do there. You can restrict them maybe slightly, but like what you don't want is where lads are going in and starting to really restrict cows when they're coming up against calving, because you're going to end up with issues with metabolic disorders or very poor colostrum. But I suppose if you're looking at cows that aren't calving until mid-March, you could start going in and restricting them at 80 to 90% until they come back to the body condition score that you want, and then you can put them back up onto their plane of nutrition. And I suppose on the thin cow side of things, you'd be looking at maybe if they're up against calving or they're closer to calving, you can go in and put in a little bit of meal in there. You're not going to affect the size of the calf. I suppose that's the big thing there, when you see lads going in and they're really restricting this silage going into cows coming up to calving. But the research shown there with Chagas and across the world is it won't reduce down the calf size, but what it will do, it'll leave you with a weak cow, maybe not able to calf and very poor colostrum when she does calf down.
Okay. And Joe, from a dairy point of view, are there any differences with the body condition score that you'd be emphasizing to your clients?
Yeah, possibly the target would be for slightly more condition, maybe 3.25, maybe at calving down, Michelle, for dairy cows. But again, as Martina said there, we don't want to have over-condition, because over-conditioned cows, when you see fat sort of accumulating at the tailhead, really, you are starting to get into risk of milk fever, particularly with older cows, maybe sort of fourth calvers and upwards. So it's something that maybe guys could do maybe in the next week or so, is, just when silage is put in and pushed up sometime, even tomorrow, go and have a look along behind the cows and see if there's a lot of fat accumulating on the tailhead. It might be time to just make sure not to overdo, particularly on the later calvers. So I suppose if we are in that situation and they're over conditioned, I suppose the later calvers we can do something about. But as they're coming into the last 2 weeks pre-calving, really, we shouldn't be restricting feed intake. We're probably looking at maybe being a little bit more careful in terms of maybe boluses, calcium boluses or something like that on the older cows that calve first. So certainly 3.25 is where we'd be talking about, not much more than that. And maybe one final thing on that is just for cows that calve down very thin in the dairy situation, there would be a risk of them not cycling for a long time after calving. So certainly for those individual cows, maybe milking those once a day for the first month or so after calving can have a very beneficial effect on body condition for those individual cows that might be thin at calving down.
Okay, and so the video also mentioned about feeding soya. So would they be the type of cow you'd be looking to feed the soy to, or how do you pick those cows?
Possibly so. I suppose I'd be looking at the soya maybe on the basis of maybe a couple of on the thinner side, but maybe more so on the quality of silage. Like if we look, really, a lot of the research would say that once your diet is at sort of 12% crude protein, generally speaking, the cows should have adequate enough protein to ensure colostrum quality. All right. So look at, if the silage is quite poor, so low to mid 60s in DMD and low in protein, there could be a positive response to in terms of colostrum quality for feeding a little bit of soya from just maybe a couple of weeks, 10 to 14 days pre-calving. You don't need to do much more than that. And as was said there, look, the recommended rate would only be sort of 0.3 of a kilo. So a kilo for every 3 cows in the pen, that type of thing. It won't cause a problem with overgrowing a calf in that short window of time, but it might just give the cow a little bit of a kick in terms of colostrum quality. So certainly on the dairy side, Michelle, it's something that I suppose it'll probably come up later, but testing colostrum quality and maybe making the decision on that basis. If for anyone that has started to test colostrum quality, they can certainly make adjustments to their dry cow diet if they think that there's a lot of cows failing that test, and that is a nice addition to management for the spring.
Okay, thanks, Joe. And you mentioned colostrum there, and as the week goes on, we're going to be discussing more about colostrum in the podcast and the other webinar. So, but it's good to, it's a multifactorial calves. It's not just one thing. There's so many areas to get it right. So, yeah, we need to be aware of them all. I suppose, Charles, just in relation to hygiene and cleanliness, how important are clean sheds, or is it too late to power wash a shed now if they haven't done it already before the calving starts? Or
hygiene is essential. I mean, there's attention to detail. It's really important. But on the other hand, one of the challenges at this time is getting things to dry out again afterwards. So you'd hope people would have had those sheds already. In my experience when I was in practice, the problem isn't now. The problem is what's happened when we have an outbreak of disease. We get a lot of scour in, March, beginning of March. Often we get through February, no problem. And now you've got a house full of calves, and you've got a hygiene problem. And the obvious solution to a hygiene problem is to go in there and hose it down. Mm-hmm. But actually, that's what you can't do, because as soon as you do that, you add a lot of moisture to the environment, which stirs up all the bugs low down, puts them into an aerosol. And the next thing we've got the risk of is getting respiratory disease. So we have to try and design sheds, and we'll come on to that in the next video, which take this into consideration and make it easy to clean out. But one thing you can do is get in there and muck it out. And in mucking out, you move all the bugs and the muck, but you also move a lot of moisture, which is good. And then I'd be talking about putting lime down, plenty of straw down, and bringing them back in again. But really, we can't, hosing sheds down when animals are in the shed is always a no-no.
Okay, and how important is a good bed, or how much would you consider a good bed of straw or for a small calf?
Calves should be able to lie down in the straw and effectively nest. And what they mean that is that if a calf is lying on its side, its hocks should be covered. So, there needs to be sort of 6 to 10 inches of straw. But, again, if you kneel down in it, if it feels comfortable, that's not a bad place to start. The other thing, of course, is that, when you stand up again, your knees should be dry as well.
Okay. So we have a couple of questions coming in there already. And again, I encourage you to send them in if you have any. It's for either Joe or Martina. It's from Thomas. Thank you, Thomas. And it's, can you feed the double recommended level of minerals? And are there any negative effects to this? I guess it's probably more for you, Joe.
Yeah, I would be saying we should stick to the recommended rate on the bag, Michelle. So that's generally 100 to 120 grams. All right. There are a couple of reasons for that. Sometimes phosphorus in particular, if there's a high level of phosphorus included in the mineral, sometimes overfeeding phosphorus to cows on the point of calving can be a bad idea. You can actually cause more problems than you'll fix. I suppose the one thing I would say about that is we would have said this to people in the past, if they have their standard dry cow mineral in place and they feel that they need a little bit of extra magnesium in particular in the week before calving, there's no harm maybe in dusting an extra 20 grams of CalMag or even mag chloride in something like a magnesium product, if you like, rather than feeding another 50 grams of the entire mineral, because you're going to overdo certain minerals when possibly all you need is a bit of extra magnesium for those few days. So certainly try and buy a mineral that has the right level of magnesium in from the start. But if you're short of that and you've already bought it, topping up with a little mag on the point of calving is probably a better idea than starting to double up the levels of mineral overall.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. That's good tip, actually. And a similar question, I guess, if someone is late starting to feed the minerals, what should they do?
Well, there's a couple of things there. The first thing really is that, our major minerals like mag and phosphorus and our vitamin D as well, those are really there to prevent sort of milk fever, to ensure that the cow cleans and calves correctly. Okay, so as long as, getting those in even for a few weeks pre-calving will be of benefit, right? The trace minerals, some of those are fed for longer to sort of build up the levels in the cow over time. I would say that it's if you're late starting, you just have to get going on it. You'll probably get over the hump in terms of milk fever if you're in for a few weeks, and it's probably a case then of continuing to feed a mineralized concentrate post-calving, particularly in a dairy situation. The cow will have a strong requirement for trace minerals and vitamins post-calving, so ensure that there's a good level of vitamins and minerals in the post-calving nut will probably help to build the trace minerals over time into the spring.
Okay, and what is your feeling on like mineral boluses? You mentioned them there earlier.
Yeah, look, I think obviously mineral boluses do their job. They provide the right minerals at the right time. I suppose the one thing we would say about the mineral bolus is don't forget that you also need to feed the macro minerals. So if you think about what we're talking about here, we're talking about feeding a mineral that's 25% or close to 25% magnesium. So that's about 25 grams of mag for the day, right? So count that up it's over a kilogram of magnesium that would be fed to the dry cow over the dry period. There's no bolus big enough to deliver that. So if there's a particular trace element deficiency on the farm, certainly a targeted bolus can help. But again, if we have a dusted mineral that has all those included, we would say ensure you meet the requirements, but there's really not much point in doubling up on the minerals, feeding them one on top of the other at that time. Perhaps maybe the bolus might be of benefit when you're off concentrate in the summertime on grass, something like that. Certainly there would be an option, but I would say pick a source of mineral and go with that rather than doubling up.
Okay, thanks, Joe. So I suppose getting back to our topic tonight, which is preparation for the calving period. The video mentioned about a shopping list and calving equipment. What are you seeing are problems on farms, Martina, or what advice would you give to people around this at this stage?
I suppose, Michelle, what we're looking at now at this time of the year is when lads are actually in the middle of calving. What you don't want is when you go out and your jack is not working, or you don't have the ropes, or you don't whatever, then you're not able to concentrate on the job at hand. And when by the time you get it, you could have a dead calf or a cow down or whatever. So like what we're looking at is, be prepared, go out, make sure that your sheds are, as Charles said, that your sheds are clean and they're well bedded, that you have your jack is working, your calving cameras are working. If you're using any calving aids like your moo calls, that they're charged and ready to go. And then on the Teagasc website, we have basically a shopping list, which just lists out, just makes it easier for you, your iodine, your gloves, your ropes. Always have a spare set of ropes. Make sure you have your tags ordered so that you have all of those there that are ready at hand and you're not distracted. You can just get on then with the job at hand.
Okay, great, thanks. And I suppose, Charles, you're a member of the TWG for CalfCare, which has developed a lot of resources for our farmers, and they're available on the AHA website. Just in case people aren't aware of them, they're very useful, and we're updating them at the moment, aren't we, Charles, with the colostrum and the housing. There's a new housing one going to be available in the next few weeks, so just keep an eye out on the social media and website for when that will be released. So I don't think there's any more questions on this area at the moment, but we will have more time later if anyone else thinks of something in the meantime. So our next video is on ventilation and calf housing and important factors to consider. So we'll look at that now, and then we'll have another discussion after that. Thank you.
The things that we need in a good calf housing facilities are a clean, dry, draft-free, well-ventilated house. And this house should have easy access to milk replacer, concentrate feeding, straw and water. Well, before any calving season begins, or before you buy in your purchased calves, all sheds should be well cleaned out. They should be power washed, disinfected and left with adequate time to dry. In order to ensure that the calf has a good dry bed, it is very easy to do a simple test. You go into the calf shed and you kneel down in the bed with the calves. When you stand up, if the two knees of your trousers are damp or wet, the calf pen is too wet and additional straw needs to be applied, or better seepage situation needs to be found. Every calf pen should have a good slope on it with a 1 in 20 fall from the back to the front to ensure that all seepage is collected at a channel along the front of the pen. There should be no seepage transferring from one pen to the other, as this can transfer disease. Most calf houses are served by natural ventilation, where they have a stack effect where the air comes in and sucked up through the outlet. If you haven't got that, you may use mechanical ventilation, where air is mechanically brought in through a ventilation system. In order to provide a draft-free environment for the calves, it is important that there's no low-lying drafts. All air inlets should be well above the calf height. And also it's important that no outlet allows air to come back in and be blowing down on top of the calves. The inlet and outlet are very important in the calf shed in that they remove a lot of gases, potentially viruses that may be within the shed. So the outlet needs to be a minimum of 1.5 meters above the inlet. This should also be covered that there's no rainfall comes back in through the outlet. The inlet then should be a minimum of 2 to 4 times the outlet, and this should be above the calf height. The inlet is very well served by Yorkshire boarding, which is 2 rows of space boards. This provides a 25% inlet. Calves can be housed individually or in group pens. Individual pens are generally 1.5 metres by 1 metre and can be very useful for preventing transfer of diseases. In reality, most farmers would use group pens for a labour efficiency and also for space allowance issues. For example, a group of 10 calves ideally require a 15 by 15 foot pen, and the idea is not to have the pen too deep in that they can be easily observed. Appropriate calf housing is essential in dairy and dairy beef enterprises to ensure that you have good calf health, you have minimal disease and maximum performance.
So the video spoke about Yorkshire boarding there, Charles, and I see you've brought on a lovely demonstration here for us. Could you go through it a bit in detail, because some people mightn't be aware of it, and even I think it's much easier to describe it when you have it there in front of you.
Exactly, Michelle, and the attention to detail is really important when we're talking about Yorkshire boarding. This is Yorkshire boarding as opposed to space boarding. Space boarding you can see through. You can't see through Yorkshire boarding, and you shouldn't be able to see you through Yorkshire boarding, whichever angle you look at it. And what it consists of is 6-inch boards, and here we've got a 2-inch gap. And then the 2 rows are separated by 2 inches as well. But what's really important when you're putting up Yorkshire boarding is that the center of this gap meets the center of that board there. And when you're doing a long shed that may be 5 bays long, it's very easy to start off correctly and then get slightly out of kilter as you go down. And before you get to the end of it, you're in the 4th bay, and all of a sudden the gaps are meeting the gaps. And that's where Yorkshire boarding will fail. My advice when people are putting up Yorkshire boarding is put up the inner row boards first of all, then put up your spacer here, and then put up the outer ones, but start on the middle bay and work outwards. Now, as I said, this has got a 6-inch board with a 2-inch gap, and this would be suitable for a sheltered site. So if you've got sheds around the calf house, or if there's trees around it, that's fine. But actually, in a lot of places in Ireland, we find that calf sheds are on the top of hills, they're in exposed sites, in which case this could be too big. So therefore, what I would then consider doing is having a 6-inch board with a 1-inch gap, and then the 2 rows are separated by 1 inch as well. Now, the big plus points about Yorkshire boarding are it allows air into the building, so you get plenty of air in, but you don't get drafts. So that's a big plus. Again, the rain can batter against this, but it won't get past this board here, so it drops out again. So the calf lying on the inside here is fine, it's not getting wet, and the bedding isn't getting wet either. And then finally, wood is an insulator. You can hold on to a piece of wood all day on a frosty day. You won't hold on to a piece of metal. So this is helping to keep the shed warmer as well, which again, we'll come on to that in the discussion as we go through it. So a lot going for Yorkshire boarding.
And like in terms of how long will they last, or do people need to treat them, or are there anything in particular we could do? Or
it'd be better to use treated timber, but the real thing that'll make this survive is making sure it's put up properly. So make sure the guttering or the chutes cover the top of the end grain here. If water's falling straight down on top here, I'm afraid it gets into the end grain, it could rot. And again, at the bottom, don't have it sitting on the wall. It's better to design it so that either it's just away from the wall or just off the top of the wall, because otherwise water can suck up into it. But we all know this, wood in the vertical plane doesn't rot. And you know that if you go out into the field, the main fence posts, they last for years. They rot at the base where they're getting wet, dry, wet, dry, wet, dry, which is why it's so important to make sure it's not sitting in water when you put it up.
Very good. So I suppose back to you, Joe. What kind of problems are you seeing on dairy farm when you're out and about in relation to calf housing, or any advice for the farmers?
I think the big problem with calf housing, Michelle, is there's not enough of it. Very simply. That is the issue. It's space, really. You do see some very nicely designed sheds, and maybe sheds that were built possibly maybe 10 years ago or something, and they're really well designed. They have the right slope, they have the nice ventilation, as Charles after describing, and you still have problems. And the simple reason is there's just too many calves. 10%, 20% too many calves in the system. So I think that's probably the thing I think we would be encouraging people to do, and our advisors would be doing the same, and we'll help you calculate that out for anyone who wants to do it, is really to focus on putting a maximum, or a maximum number of calves in putting a limit on the number of calves that go into the shed at maximum, basically. So if you say that there's enough space for 25 calves in that shed, you shouldn't put 27 calves into it. That is to me is the problem at farm level. And when you do those calculations and you work it out, you do see then what level of deficiency or what level of a gap you have to make up. And then it's up to, I suppose, your own imagination and your own ingenuity as to how you're going to make the difference. But for farms that have struggled over the last couple of years and that have put extra space on the yard, be that extra igloos, extra hutches, access to a different shed that's converted, whatever it might be, the general health of the cows overall will tend to improve. So space is the big thing. And just one final point on that maybe is that, sometimes there's a bit of a perception out there that it's the compactness of calving that causes problems on farms, that all these cows calving together is the issue. But what I would sort of tend to see out there actually would be that the farms that really have nailed down their 6-week calving rate tend to have the best facilities actually. They've planned for it and things go relatively well. It's a mix of calf ages and a calf season that drags on from January until May. Those farms tend actually to have more problems with calves because they're at different ages, they have different space requirements, they have different infection pressures. So, that might be something to remember. It's not, diluting down our objectives around compactness of calving is not really what we should be doing. We should actually be planning to deal better with the peak when it comes, I would say.
Okay, thank you. And Charles, I suppose just in relation to how calf houses work ventilation-wise compared to adults, could you describe that first, because it's a little different, the two systems?
Absolutely. When we've got adult cows or weanlings or suckler cows with suckler calves, the cows and the weanlings generate a lot of heat, and that's because they're ruminants, and ruminants produce a lot of heat. And as a result, because they produce hot air rises, and effectively that'll leave the building as long as there is an opening in the top ridge. And because air is moved out of the top of the building, then fresh air can be drawn in from the sides. So that's how basically weanling sheds work, and that's how suckler and calf operations will work. And that's called the stack effect. But for dairy calves or dairy to beef calves that have been bought in for that system, they don't produce heat. They're about as efficient as us as producing heat, which is very inefficient. So as a result, we can't rely on that to drive the system. So what makes calf sheds work in Ireland is the wind, which fortunately blows most of the time here. And it's the wind hitting the side of the building, and some of that is going to be pushed through your Yorkshire boarding, and it's actually going to be pushed through there, but not to create a draft, but it'll push through and it'll go out the other side. So effectively, we're getting air moving through the building that way. But the other thing is that when you've got a ridge and you've got the wind hitting the side of the roof, running up the roof, you create negative air pressure right at the ridge at the top there. And that effectively sucks air out as well. So those two things are going to drive ventilation. But it's really important that you've got air coming in from both sides. It's also really important that the sheds aren't too wide. Ideally, a calf shed is no more than 30 to 35 feet, which is only sort of 10 to 12 meters. Any wider than that, and we actually have problems. There are also plenty of places, because in this country we hate to waste a wall, so we frequently build onto sheds, and as a result we're blocked off one of the inlets effectively. So there are situations we find where actually there is no way you can rely on it being naturally ventilated. And then we can look at positive pressure ventilation, which is where you effectively put a fan in with a long tube, plastic tube, which is specially designed, fitted at the right height to blow air into the house, which doesn't create drafts, doesn't end up with calves getting cold, but does give them enough ventilation. And talking about the Yorkshire boarding is all very well, but it's the 18th of January today. No one can go and put up Yorkshire boarding, in my opinion, for this calving season. That boat has sailed. If you are in trouble and you realize, gosh, I had trouble last year with ventilation, I've done nothing about it, the fan actually would be the quickest thing to do as a quick fix. I'm not, and in some systems are designed around fans, but if you wanted a quick fix.
And is it easy to get those, or how do you go about that? Or
the easiest thing for me to say to people is get onto Google, put in ventilation, calf, Ireland, shed. You do that, because I did it this afternoon, it'll bring up a company based here in Ireland that can deliver. I don't know how quickly they can deliver, but I know that they can deliver. It's only a matter of cutting a hole in the end of the building, stretching a wire down it, and sticking a fan in. It's not not like taking the whole of a shed off and putting it up with.
But you were saying the air spaces, they have to be tailor-made for the shed.
Very much so, tailor-made. And for instance, a tube can only ventilate about 10 to 12 meters width. So if you've got a very wide shed, you may have to put 2 of these in. Okay. But there are specialists who basically will measure up your shed, see exactly how it's fitting, and will give you the right holes in the right places. Okay. And one last thing to say about them, they are an inlet, they're driving air in. We still need outlets. So you still need to have an outlet, because if you just drive air into the shed and there isn't a way of getting out, then the bugs are just circulating around, the moisture is circulating around and not getting out of the building. So we do have to let the air out as well. So
does it still use the same outlet?
Can still use the same outlet. And a ridge outlet, again, is the ideal, would be the thing to do there, yeah.
I suppose one problem we'd see in Ireland is because calves are born at a kind of a colder time of year, is keeping them warm, and the effect of like cold stress might, you know, they might be more susceptible to disease. Would you have any advice or any things you can do to help minimize this?
Absolutely right. I mean, straw is part of that solution. Using plenty of dry, clean, dry straw and making a good dry bed is part of that, and so that the calves can nest into that. Making sure that the bed doesn't get wet. And now part of that's around the design of the shed, because if you've got good sloping floors, then you will find that the bed doesn't get damp as quickly. Mm-hmm. To come back to Joe's point about stocking rates, you know, if a shed is overstocked, you're going to have to change the bedding much more frequently. And that frequently can be the thing that tips the balance. And then blocking off all the drafts is essential, so we don't have air rushing in at calf height. And then finally, calf jackets. And calf jackets, you know, are very useful. They need to be breathable, they need to be adjustable, and they need to be cleanable. So you put them onto a small calf. The calf needs to be dry. So, you know, put them on at day 1, but the calf needs to be dry when it goes onto the calf. And then, you know, keep an eye on the straps, adjust it as the calf grows. And really, they only need them for about 3 to 4 weeks. After that, the benefit isn't really there. But that'll make a huge difference to calves as well.
I suppose some questions I would have been asked and as in practice was when to take off the calf jacket. What would you say to that? Or
well, you know, ideally we'd be planning for about 3 to 4 weeks of age, but be clever about it. Let's, you know, if the weather's about to turn, the beast from the east is going to arrive or whatever, we don't take the jackets off then. So we need to be conscious of that. And the other thing we need to be conscious of, don't do something stressful as you take the jacket off. So disbudding, disbud them before you take the jacket off, or leave them a week or so afterwards till they've hardened off. But, you know, we need to be slightly, you know, clever about when we do that. Don't just whip them off. But, you know, they do make a big difference to both the health and the welfare, but actually the performance as well. Calves will grow faster if they're warm.
So you mentioned a stressful event there. So what kind of advice would you give around vaccinating and dehorning, or how do you, the time-wise, for how do you fit those in for vaccinating for pneumonia, say, as we're talking about ventilation and sheds and stuff?
Well, a lot of these young calves, we'd be promoting the use of intranasal vaccines because hopefully they've had a good feed of colostrum. So using an intranasal vaccine, and they can be used from a week to 10 days of age. So that's when you'd hope they'd be vaccinated. Now, you don't want to vaccinate them and disbud them at the same time, because if you do, the vaccine won't work properly, because what vaccines are doing is stimulating the immune system, the ability of the calf to make the antibodies in the defense system. But if it's stressed, that won't happen. And disbudding, unfortunately, is stressful. So my advice would be you vaccinate the calves when they're a week to 2 weeks of age, and then you wait 2 weeks, and then you go in and disbud the calves at that stage using local anesthetic and doing the job at that stage. Okay. And that way you'll reduce, because if we vaccinate and disbud, 1, the vaccine isn't going to work, but 2, there's a chance that stress is going to set off the pneumonia rather than preventing it.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions in there. Actually, we'll stick with ventilation one first from Colin, and it's for you again, Charles. What is the correct stocking rate for calves in a shed, and what about windbreakers for calf houses?
Stocking rate is measure the pen area, and ideally you should have 2 square meters per calf. And in fairness, Gordon in the video mentioned that that as well. So that's, you know, is the actual area of the ground. There are calculations you can do about working out how big the outlet should be and how big the inlet should be. I'd suggest you possibly contact either a vet or your Chuggas advisor on that one. I mean, the figure is 0.04 meters squared for an outlet per calf. You multiply that up, and then you need twice that area coming in from the sides. He mentioned gale breaker as well, and that's the perforated netting, which is very good at stopping drafts, and it's very good about letting air in. Unfortunately, the rain gets through it as well. And the rain will frequently get through it about 1 meter, which means now you can potentially have a wet side to your building. So I'll be honest with you, I'm not a big enthusiast of gale breaker down the sides of buildings. Having said that, it can be quite useful to say over gates, where you've got to drive a tractor in and out of, that sometimes there are reasons why it can be used. But I think it's not as, it's for the southwest wall of a building, i.e. facing the southwest, which is what you want the building to face that way, but you don't want gale breaker on it. That's why you want something like Yorkshire boarding.
It might be a short-term solution, like now,
yes.
maybe if
it's a short. It'd be a quick fix,
yeah.
But it's not really a long-term. Not a long-term solution.
Okay. So I have a question for Joe from James. If silage protein is 12%, is a month of soya pre-calving too much if a lot of the herd calves in a short period of time?
It is, yeah. Look, I would say that if you're at 12% and the silage intakes are good and silage quality is good, I'd be questioning the need for soya at all, really, to be honest with you. I think 12% is the magic number. We'd be talking really more the soya being of use if you were talking about sort of mid-60s DMD silage, 10% protein, that kind of stuff. We saw, I suppose, to be fair, Michelle, probably in the winter of 18 when after the drought in the summer, where a lot of people made silage in September and October and things like that to try and make up the difference, and then that was fed to cows at the time of calving. That's when the soya really would come into its own. Maybe on your suckler systems for the first calvers it would be of use, but I don't think for the majority of people with good silage, I think it should be okay. But as I say, test your colostrum quality, and that'll tell you how you're getting on. I think if there's most of them are passing it, or the great majority of cows are passing that test, you'd really question whether it's worth the effort or the cost of the additional soya, but certainly needed if silage quality is poor.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Martina, I suppose we're on about preparing, and I know, picking your cows and cow selection. What kind of ways can people, or what tools can people use to select the right cows that are calving close together, or go about calving dates and stuff?
I suppose it's using your scanning results, really, Michelle, so that people know they've scanned their cows, they know what dates that their cows are going to calve, and then that they're penned accordingly, so they'll be able to feed them accordingly, and then when they've calved, they're able to move them on to a better quality ration or silages after the calve. And I suppose the two things that we'd use there is there's the ICBF has a pregnancy diagnosis, and you put in your scanning results into that, and then it'll print you out a report, which will basically your expected calving report, and that'll tell you, it'll list down all your cows by their jumbo tag. It'll give you the date that they're going to calve, and it'll give you the sire that they're in calf 2 if you're using AI, or if it's your own stock bull, or you can simply just put it in onto an Excel sheet yourself or write it down, and that way well, my cow is going to calve when. If it's twins, make sure to highlight that it's twins, and so that'll give you an idea of when your peak workload is going to be.
Okay, great, very good. And is it difficult to do you have to be a member of ICBF, or can anyone, or what's the story?
Yeah, you have to be a part of the Herd Plus, so that's where you have to pay the extra €60. So that's fairly simple you can either ring ICBF and you can pay them over the phone and they'll make you a member of Herd Plus straight away, or you can go in online, print out the application form, fill it up, and enclose a cheque and send it down to Bandon in Cork.
We've another question in there. It's for Charles again. You're getting a grilling tonight, Charles. What is the correct temperature to have in the calf house, and what about vented sheeting?
The first part of that question I like. The second part is going to get me going, but I'll come to that. But no, it's a very good question, and the ideal temperature for calf house is somewhere between 15 degrees and 20 degrees. And the challenge we have in this country is that most of our cows calve down between the end of January and the end of April. I mean, and the temperature doesn't reach that, because actually, as I said earlier, calves don't generate heat. So therefore, if the air temperature outside is today 7 degrees, guess what the temperature in the calf house is? It's 7. But there's going to be days in March when it's going to be sitting around 3 or 4, so it's a lot lower. And that's the challenge we have. And in reality, we're never going to get them to the ideal temperature. Calf jackets would probably do it, but without calf jackets, you're never going to get calves up to the right temperature. It just isn't going to happen. And then you got me on one of my favorites, vented sheeting. Okay, it's made of metal. So that's one issue I have with it, because that means when you ask about temperature, well, if it's made of metal, it's going to lose heat quicker. It's also going to gain heat on a sunny day. So you get these massive fluctuations potentially inside the shed. Biggest problem with it, though, is the amount of air it lets in, because it doesn't let in as much air as everyone thinks it does, even when it's brand new and it's clean. Now, if you have, say, a 6-inch board with a 2-inch gap, which is what we showed you there, that means you've got 8 inches altogether. And if you take 2 inches away, that means it's 25% open. So that's what we call the porosity.
Okay.
The porosity of vented sheeting is 5%. Okay. So in other words, to get the same amount of air into the side of a building that you could get from a 25% open Yorkshire boarding, it'd have to be 5 times higher. We'd have to start building cathedrals to get the air in. The economics don't add up, and I'm sorry, but it is not suitable for calf sheds.
Okay, well, I think you answered that one anyway, Charles.
I was quite polite about it.
And another one, can you wash down the concrete apron that the calves are fed on with a volume washer, or will it make the shed too damp?
Brilliant question. I understand exactly where the person's coming from, because they want to have a clean and it's clean and cleanable, and they want to do that. But actually, no, don't wash it down, because in washing it down, you're adding water to the environment. In adding water to the environment, you're doing 3 things that are bad news. One, bugs don't survive in a dry environment, so you're increasing the chances of bugs surviving. Bugs don't have wings. Viruses don't have wings. They rely on moisture droplets. So you have a dry environment, they won't move around. If you wash down that area, you'll just increase the amount of water droplets. And then the other thing they do, as soon as you add water to the environment, because of latent heat of vaporization, which you did in your lead insert, you get colder. So if you walk into a wet shed, it's colder. So you're bringing the temperature down. So ideally, we design aprons that are just brushed off, so they're quite smooth, and they've got a good slope on them, 1 in 20, so that we can clean it off just using a squeegee and scrape it off. So yes, it's not as clean as washing it down, but the problem is you can't add water to the environment.
Okay. So I suppose sometimes people think like that there's one quick fix to calves or calf housing or calf problems, but what you're saying really, or what we're all trying to say, is there isn't, and there's lots of little things that you have to do. Martina, what would be kind of the main problems you'd see going out onto beef farms? Or
yeah, and I suppose it goes back to some of what Charles had said, like drafts are probably one of the biggest things that we'd see in the sheds. Yes. Like, you know, you'd have doors there and you'd be looking at drafts coming in, and you know, most people when they're in their sheds, they're standing in their wellies and they might have leggings on them, so they're not feeling that draft. So like you really do need to kind of get down at the level that your calf is lying at. And the other part would be the moisture in the shed. Like, so you need to make sure that it's well bedded and that you are cleaning them out quite often, so that you're not having that moisture building up there. And cleanliness, hygiene, like making sure that you're going in and cleaning those sheds and putting in lime in underneath them. And I suppose on the suckler cow side of things, one of the big things is dirty cows as well. Like, you know, that these cows are dirty and they're going back in and they're lying in the area where the calves are. So as much as possible, keep the slatted areas clean, keep them limed, and have the cows clean. So if you need to do their tails or their flank, to make sure that they're clean, but they're usually the ones that we'd see.
And would there be a lot of like kind of in and out in sucklers, like half in, half out for the cows and calves, like at this time of year? Or
yeah, there would, like say, if what we would be trying to recommend is that it's only the calf that's able to go back in onto the lie back area, so that it's kept nice and clean for those. Like, you don't have the cow going in and dragging muck and dirt in with her. But at least if the slatted area is clean and it's limed, you're not going to have that same level. And the other big thing then is the drafts, and maybe just going and getting a bit of rubber or getting a bit of sheeting onto those gates and onto the edges of the doors, just to stop that draft coming in at the
And now is the time to do that.
And now and it can be very simple. A few Tech screws and a bit of rubber around the doors, it can make a huge difference.
Because as you say, it's at the level of the calf.
At the level
the
of the
important.
calf. Yeah.
I don't think we've any more questions there. So can I ask you, Joe, I'll start with you. What are your kind of key messages for people to take away tonight from what we were talking about?
Yeah, I suppose just from a feeding point of view, pre-calving, Michelle, it's just really making sure body condition is correct, making sure that our mineral nutrition is correct, and that our protein nutrition is correct as well, which gives the cow the better chance of having a trouble-free calving and also having enough colostrum. And I think once you have that and the calf gets the required amount of colostrum, it's off to a great start. So I think, maybe a lot of the time people mightn't associate attention to detail on pre-calving feeding. They mightn't associate that with calf health, but there is a strong link there. So over the next couple of weeks, just make sure to get your mineral and your protein and energy nutrition right, and it'll help with calf health in the longer term.
Okay, thanks, Joe. And Martina, from the beef side, is there any other things you'd add?
It's kind of the same thing. Is that body condition score is hugely important. Firstly, for the cow to be able to calve down, and then also that she's the good body condition score, that she's on a positive plane of nutrition afterwards, and that she will go back in calf. And I suppose the other thing, which on the suckler side of the house, is the safety element. Like, we have a lot of lads that are going in to actually go in and handle cows, like, and heifers in particular, so to make sure and keep an eye on that, like that, when they're going into the shed, that, the gates are working, your calving jacks are working, that you're able to close the gate behind you, it's not tied, that you have an escape route at all times. Make sure and keep your mobile phone on you and know your air code. And I suppose the mobile phone thing too is to make sure it's somewhere that you can reach it. Like, you'll often see lads, they'll leave it down and they'll go on in to do something or whatever, but make sure that it's in a pocket, either in your leg or in your breast pocket, that, that you're staying safe.
Yeah. I suppose, and like a calving crush obviously is essential, but you'd be surprised how many people don't have one of those still. So there's another question after coming in. It's from Noel. In the dairy situation, how long should the calf be left with the cow post-calving? I'll give that to you, Charles.
The problem about cows is they're actually a risk to the calf as soon as the calf has been born. And they're a source of, both trauma, they can stand on them, and also of bugs, your rotavirus, your crypto, your cocci, all of these come from cows. So what we should do is move the calf away from the cow to a safe environment as quickly as possible. And that safe environment should be a well-designed calf shed. And if I could just sort of slightly elaborate, not very, very, very briefly, but there are only 5 things that you have to do to create a good calf house. And that is, you need plenty of fresh ventilation, fresh air is essential. We need no drafts, and in fairness, you just touched on the drafts there and prevent them, so we need no drafts. Then we need to make sure that it's dry, we need to make sure it's warm, and it's clean and cleanable. Those 5 things are all we have to do. The challenge is that some of them are pulling in different directions. So the clean and cleanable, we've touched on this. No, the power hose isn't the answer, but the design can make sure that we don't have to use as much water. And in a way, sort of in the last minute, no, you can't go and change a whole ventilation system on the shed now in the next 2 weeks. That isn't possible. But you can go and do something about the drafts. You can do something about thinking, no, I'm not going to be throwing water around this building. So there are things that we can take home from here.
Okay. And there's another couple of questions after coming in. From Thomas. Can you successfully rear calves outside using calf hutches and feed once a day from 3 weeks? Well, I know by law we're not allowed to feed once a day for under 4 weeks, so that kind of answers that one. The hutches outside, Joe, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, if the calf's in a hutch, they're not outside, Michelle. They're inside, because that sounds like a flippant thing to say, but the environment in a hutch, if it's well managed, can be excellent. The temperature in a hutch, for example, can be often higher than in a cold calf shed. And I know there's people tend to get a little bit sniffy sometimes about calf hutches, but I know back to the Beast from the East in 18, there was plenty of people that said that the warmest calves were the ones in the hutches, and the ones in the big concrete sheds were the ones that were feeling the cold, right? So I think, again, stock and density, good management of the surface and keeping them dry and well bedded and well fed. There's absolutely no reason why cows can't perform in hutches. I think they have to be well set up to allow people to manage them easily and collect the runoff of them. But, you know, as a solution to maybe, you know, a situation maybe where somebody's going to be overcrowded in their yard, would I prefer to see, you know, maybe Charles can comment on this too, that would I prefer to see somebody with a correctly stocked shed plus some hutches alongside it to augment the space, or would I rather see them all pushed into the shed? I'd much prefer to see them spread over and some calves fed in hutch or managed in hutches. And just one other final point maybe on the hutch thing, they're actually quite useful in terms of maybe farms that are selling their bull calves off at a month old. And there's always this issue in concrete sheds where it's the second crop of calves coming in that causes an issue. So maybe the bull calves born in February are fine, and then a few weeks later they're sold, and the cat maybe or maybe not, the shed gets cleaned out, and then another crop of calves goes in. That's generally the problem around Patrick's Day. You see awful trouble like that. The one good advantage of a hutch is that they're actually very easy to clean and dry between batches. Okay, you take your batch out, you power wash them down, they'll dry out in a few hours, and you're back and you have space again. So they're quite flexible actually, and I don't think they should be discounted at all.
And what kind of surface would you recommend putting them on then? Or?
Well, sure, look, I think it has to be again, if we can have a concrete slope, of course, you know, some people put them in silage pits, just be careful on the slope. You have to collect the effluent off them. So some people might want to maybe put a sort of a raised floor in the hutch itself, maybe, you know, kind of a raised or an artificial slatted floor if possible. But I think if it's well drained on concrete and well bedded, it can work very well. And again, as I say, you know, maybe in a lot of cases, they might be the calves that are destined for sale. So oftentimes, maybe the calves never get too much more than maybe a month old in the hutches, on a dairy situation anyway, which means that the effluent levels on them are going to be relatively small in the young calves. So no, they're a live option, I would say.
Okay, thanks, Joe. We're running out of time. I just have one more quick question. I'll give it to Charles there. But if there are any other questions that we didn't answer, we will get back to them in the next day. Will putting lime under straw for young calves pose any danger to the calf health?
No, I mean, I hear where you're coming from, but no, I mean, I think is that a gentle dusting of lime, okay, just to soak up a bit of the moisture that you obviously can't remove, and then a decent bed of straw, and you'll be fine with that, yes.
Very good. There are still some more questions, but I better wrap it up. I'm getting daggers there from Declan behind the screen. So I just want to thank all my panel tonight, Joe, Martina and Charles. Thanks for making the effort. I know it wasn't easy the way things are. I thank, on behalf of AHI, I'd like to thank Teagasc and Declan for providing the platform for hosting this seminar. And just to remind you what's coming up for the rest of the week, tomorrow there are some videos going to be released on colostrum throughout the day, and there'll be a podcast on the Dairy Edge with Emma Louise Coffey. On Wednesday, we have another live webinar with Stuart Childs is the host, and the topics will be calf diseases, the scouring calf and how to treat it, and also about vaccinating the pregnant cow. And then again on Thursday, there will be videos on feeding the calf, both concentrate and milk. So just to let you know that this webinar has been recorded and it will be available from tomorrow on AHI and Teagasc websites. So I think that's everything. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for all the questions and making it more interactive. And stay safe and best of luck for the calving season.